Shockwaves roared through the Kodan. Alerts blazed. The hull screamed from the radiation and energy that was being poured through its superstructure. Then there was a massive pop, and a rush of wind that caused several of the crewmates on the bridge to be knocked over. The spinal turret of the Kodan had exploded in a shower of sparks, leaving the hatchway open to the void of space for just a second before it closed.
Captain, we've lost the spinal cannon. I can see that scum. Roll ship. Belay the Sandcaster's order.
Yanghu looked up in panic, seeing that a fusillade of 9 missiles were already incoming on his vessel.
All gunners, I need point defense. There, behind one of the planet's moons. Let's get under cover.
He turned to give orders to his sensor operator, to find that the little kobold had taken the initiative, and was already attempting to jam the enemy sensors. He was glad he had resisted his impulse to pummel the creature several minutes ago. The rockets of the Kodan screamed as it rolled over, exposing its 2 belly turrets to the enemy. His gunners knew their jobs well. The pulse lasers fired shower upon shower of laser beams. The space between the Kodan and the Zur filled with pearls of light and heat for a moment, perfectly spherical explosions that then faded away to nothing. A second arc of crackling plasma narrowly missed the Kodan as it temporarily took shelter behind one of the small moonlets in orbit around Orbos. He breathed a sigh of relief for a moment before more alarms went off. Well, the fusion cannon may have missed. One of the Zur's pulse lasers had punched a hole straight through the computer core. Screens glitched and crackled all around him. The sensor readout, even the damage reports, were all on the fritz. Unsure of the comms, he simply bellowed through the hall.
Engineering, get that computer fixed if you want to live. Pilot, hard to starboard. Let's come around the moonlet from a direction they don't expect.
The Kodan whirled around the moonlet from a different side than one might have been expecting. Well, almost anyone. The Zur was waiting for them. Yanghu's gunners opened with a rain of laser fire that ripped open a hole in the Zur's belly. Tons upon tons of cargo spilling out like a trail of blood floating in 0G. Several radar dishes were sheared from the Zur's hull. He didn't have much time to celebrate. Another arc of the fusion cannon cut into the side of the ship. Antennae, dishes, and cameras were melted off of one side of the Kodan's hull, leaving it just as blinded as its opponents.
Engineering, where's our computers? By the Lords of Chaos, if you don't get those...
He stopped dead at the sight of his engineering crew's corpses drifting out into the cold void. A frustrated blow given to the side of a computer bank temporarily knocked the screen back into working order, just long enough for him to see another incoming fusillade of missiles.
More point defense. Let none of those missiles get through.
The pulse lasers howled to life again, filling the space between the Zur and the Kodan with beams of light, but only a few pearls came. Most of the missiles were not intercepted.
We're shooting blind, Captain!
No sooner had the gunner said these words than an arc of radioactive blue flame leapt from the hatchway where he had been sitting a moment earlier. The crew was pulled to their knees for a moment before a hatch sealed. The turret, along with the gunner, disintegrated. Yanghu had the time to pull himself to his feet, snorting defiantly as he pulled his helmet off the wall and fit it to his spacesuit.
Hail the Lords of Chaos, my minions. You now die for the glory of the Trossi.
Then the Kodan vanished from view, obscured by a blossom of spherical explosion. Welcome to Swords Against Madness, an experimental fusion of solo fantasy RPG and storytelling. I'm playing Swords and Wizardry, a modern remake of the original 1974 rules for Dungeons & Dragons, along with a handful of tools for solo role-playing and occasionally bits of other classic role-playing games. I will play the game and then turn it into a psychedelic, gonzo sword and sorcery story for your enjoyment. And along the way, I'll try to keep it PG, or what passed for PG when I was a kid in the 80s. If you didn't see it in Goonies, Gremlins, or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you won't hear it here. So get comfortable in your studded leather kirtle or your chainmail bikini. Reload your 3-bladed sword, and fire up the wizard van. It's time to get weird. This episode contains a little coarse language. Nothing that steps out of my boundaries of being PG, but I thought it was fair to let you know all the same. Miria! Miria! Pull yourself together, woman! Miria staggered back, stunned by the slap across the face. She stared in surprise at her erstwhile valet. Up to this point, Edryk had been a very mild, easily bullied person. This was a surprise, and one she had desperately needed for a number of reasons. She realized she'd been pushing him around and generally acting well outside her usual character up to this point. More importantly, she'd acted like a fool. She had spent years teaching herself mental disciplines. She was aggravated at herself. It was a very poor magician, a poor ship's captain, and indeed a very poor Okano, who let the horrors of the situation paralyze them. No, she didn't need to freeze up right now. She needed to stay angry and stay focused. The stinging of her cheek was a welcome reminder. I'm sorry, but you'll bring every creature in here down on us if you keep that up. Are you done now? Edryk, she only had 2 friends on this island, and she's watched them both die in a few days. And now, Garland, as much as a jerk as he was, is dead too. Come on, show a little compassion. Nala didn't look entirely convinced herself about what she was saying. She was terrified here, and the last thing she wanted was to deal with a cackling madwoman. But she was also a healer defending her patient.
It's okay, Nala. He was right to do it. I deserved that. Rhea and Olan were my friends, and they made a lot of sacrifices to try and help me save my own life. I would be thanking them very poorly indeed if I just gave up now. Nobody deserves to be slapped under a circumstance like this. You know what? I kind of think I did. I've been a royal bitch to a lot of people lately. I'm putting on airs like I'm still some system lord's daughter. And I'm not considering the safety of the people around me nearly as much as I should. That slap is exactly what I deserved. And Edryk, I've been an especial bitch towards you. I'm going to own that now, and I'm sorry. The people on this island, they have a strange idea of duty towards people that they've rescued or healed, when all they've done already is good for them. I live in a culture where people are a lot more transactional. The way people keep feeling obligated to me and then coming to help me, I don't like it, and I'm not used to it, and it has gotten a few people killed. I should not take your honorable intentions for granted so much. And I owe this island, too. The Gorham, Olan, Rhea, the Trossi, everyone here deserves so much better than that. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that you get what you deserve. That you people are free to live out your lives, not be as puppets of a church or an alien crime syndicate or whoever else is pulling the strings around here. Let's go wake up the all-knowing. Rhea and Olan would have wanted that. And then we're going to expose all the corruption of the people in power who are hurting this island. And if I ever treat either of you that badly again, smack me harder, okay? Just smack me harder. I didn't even like doing that the first time. I'm not in the habit of hitting women. And so, do me a favor. Don't deserve it, because I don't want to make that a habit. Fair enough. Thank you, Edryk.
She looked down at the corpse laying at the bottom of the pit, impaled on spikes.
I'm sorry, Garland. You're the person who made the most sense to me on this island, even if I didn't like you. Rest in peace.
All three of them took a ragged breath together, none of them realizing that they'd kind of been holding it. And then, with Miria in the lead, they turned to face the rest of the dungeon. One thing I love about working with a Game Master emulator is that it does things I don't expect, and it changes the narrative constantly. I'm not sure what's going to happen from moment to moment, so I really am having just as much of an adventure as I do with a live Dungeon Master. I was worried when I started using the dropship that it would take all the challenge out of the game. Getting from point A to point B on the Isle of Nar is no easy feat. So much jungle and mountain. It is possible that traversing one hex on that island can take most of a day. And that is why, at least in the early stages, I integrated the threat of Yanghu simply blowing the Olan out of the sky every time it blasted off. Now, I know and Miria doesn't what the weather's going to be like in the afternoon in this adventure, and so I made a roll on the Mythic GM emulator. When Miria takes off again in the afternoon, is she going to have to contend with Yanghu shooting her down? I wasn't even sure I was going to come out of the dungeon alive, but for some reason I felt the need to prepare that. And what I got was an extreme no. That told me that not only was Yanghu not able to track the ship even on a clear sunny afternoon, but that something was up to make it that way. And so I made a roll on the Oracle and got the result of a betrayal. Obviously, whoever's buying the Gorham is not a good person. That's not a product you buy unless you're planning on doing something truly horrific. It's also not something you want connected to you. Just owning the Gorham is probably a war crime. And so, it is perfectly possible if you find Yanghu distracted, too focused on the planet, and say you intercepted a transmission between a crazy wizard and Yanghu talking about the location of some of his bases. Well, you might just decide to eliminate him. When I first played the game, I decided that I would follow up later to ask if Yanghu was still a threat. But then I realized that I was missing a big opportunity by just relying on Mythic. After all, there's nothing more exciting than a good space battle. So I decided that this might be a good opportunity to play a little Traveller alongside my classic D&D. I've only played Traveller once, a long time ago, and it was GURPS Traveller, so it didn't work quite the same way. But I've always loved how cinematic its space combat is. It feels a lot like the Honorverse novels from David Weber, where the hero can find themselves trying to survive in a spacesuit in a ship that's been punched full of holes and is slowly burning around them. And so I decided this was the perfect opportunity to shake out the system. I grabbed my new hard copy of Cepheus Deluxe, which is a retro clone that combines most of the elements of Classic Traveller, a little bit of Mega Traveller, and some quality of life upgrades from both of them. And I played a knockdown, drag-out battle between a 300-ton Corsair ship, the Kodan, and the Zur, a 400-ton freighter that had been converted to use as a pirate ship, with hidden turrets equipped with a wide variety of weaponry. In this fight, I would have put my money on Yanghu. A Corsair is a little lighter, yes, but it is armored and designed for battle, whereas an armed freighter is taking a big risk and has to rely on surprise. The dice had a different story to tell. At first, the armor and superior weaponry of the Kodan gave Yanghu a bit of an advantage. He managed to maneuver himself to a position where he could shoot at the enemy and they would have difficulty shooting back. But for some reason, he had a streak of bad luck. His engineers were having difficulty, his gunners suddenly started missing, and then the Zur, having seemingly stolen his luck, hammered him hard, destroying a good chunk of their computer systems and sensors in a couple of fusillades. With their electronics malfunctioning, the Kodan just couldn't seem to shoot down the incoming missiles. The battle ended with me having to roll 20 different hits on the Kodan system, In the end, the ship was left as immobile Swiss cheese with no guns left to its name, barely any life support, and no ability to move. And while at first I struggled with the system, once I got the rhythm, this battle felt really exciting, and I'm really glad to share it with you. I'm glad I decided to play out this fight. Now, what that means for the island of Nar, that should be very interesting indeed. Let's find out. Hello, I'm your anchorman Toby Dampt, here to tell you about Transreal News. What's this? You need to tell them about Transreal News? Clee, I'm in the middle of something here.
I think it's a wonderful idea, explaining exactly what we do here, Toby.
Thank you, Walter, but I'm trying to do this live. Oh, that's simply marvelous, Toby. That gives me an opportunity to steal the screen from you. Clee, shouldn't you be working on your advisories? We do have a broadcast to do in just a few minutes. Well, doesn't that make the timing a little difficult on your part, Toby? Well, it wouldn't be if I didn't keep getting interrupted. I just want to tell people about Transreal News.
Ha! Foolish primitive! I can tell you exactly what Transreal News is. It's a show where a bunch of shills and liars create a podcast trying to tell people what's going on ever since reality broke down and time and space became distorted.
Shills? Liars? I resemble that remark, darling.
I will run you through, Maxwell.
Promises, promises, Torg. Listen, guys, this is important. We tell people about rampaging time barbarians.
We will conquer.
Lockdowns in hell. The televistic slime that's slowly eating the noosphere. Sure, we have to run ads and look out for what the authorities tell us to say and not to say, but that doesn't mean we're not valid journalists.
Here, here, Toby. Somebody's got to warn them about the strange reality storms coming in, or the rampaging monsters across Australia, or
the ultra-violent time barbarians trying to murder their own ancestors to make themselves stronger.
Do not speak of which you don't understand, fool. That's enough, guys. For crying out loud, I'm trying to look professional here.
Sorry, Toby.
Tune into Transreal News for the most important news, advisories, and forecasts for people traveling the astral plane and beyond. Anywhere where you get your finest podcasts. The shimmering pool in the chamber beyond the pit cast strange ripples of blue light everywhere. It was almost hypnotic. Every one of them felt, but did not voice a compulsion to go swimming in the water. Given how wet the floor was, it was clear that Garland had done so. It was impossible as well to escape noticing that his boots, without buckles, and the haft of his halberd, without blade or bracings, was floating in the water, or whatever it was. Experimentally, Edryk tied a coin to the end of a string and dipped it in the fluid. It hissed and bubbled for a moment, and then he withdrew a string free of a coin. Well, that's strange and horrible. Remind me next time not to use my money for such experiments. Nala squatted close to the fluid and shrugged. It's better than losing your arm sticking it in first, although it doesn't seem to have done Garland's flesh any difficulties, and it's not melting that boot. Experimentally, she pulled a leather flask from her pocket and dipped it into the fluid, double-checking the state of her fingers when she pulled it out. Then she dabbed a small drop of it on a brass lantern she had hanging from her belt. Where the fluid touched, it hissed and foamed for a moment, leaving a nick in the base of the lantern. Might be useful. Remind me to come back here with a wooden gourd someday. Miria, in the meantime, was less interested in the fluid, and far more interested in the shape of the room. She carefully compared it to a sketch she had made of the machine that they had tinkered with in the room where Rhea had died.
If my understanding of the machine is correct, then this is the way onward, through that southern door there. Let's go.
They examined the door for runes. They poked and prodded the floor carefully with the tip of a staff. They checked for signs of spring-loaded mechanisms.
This door hasn't got any of the old triggers on it. Looks safe.
Nodding at Nala's assessment, Miria grabbed hold of the door handle and turned it. It wasn't until she was pushing the door open that Edryk spoke his mind.
But what if they keep trying different tricks? This is the order of the...
His words ended in a mighty yawn as he looked down and saw a tiny nozzle that had become unblocked by the opening of the door. The faint shimmer of a vapor rising from it was the only clue as to what was happening before the room began to spin, and all three of them collapsed. Well, there it is. When I play D&D with a group, one of the things I've taken to doing is describing exactly how I look for secret doors and secret passages. If you leave it to the dice, you can often miss important clues. For example, if I'm looking for a secret door in a drafty dungeon, I'll have my character light a candle and flick a little oil on it to create smoke, then move the candle around the wall looking for places where it seeps in between the bricks. The DM can make you roll if you just say, I check for traps, but if you create a condition where they have to describe how the environment interacts, a good dungeon master in an old-school game of D&D will give you the point. Which is, of course, why any character I have with a reasonable strength score ends up carrying bellows, marbles, a bocce ball, bags of ground-up chalk, and any other number of things that would make my character the envy of Doctor Who. Mind you, I've only once acquired a sonic screwdriver in my travels in D&D. But, in playing a dungeon that has been generated by Donjon, I have the map there plain as day, complete with the markings as to whether or not it's trapped or not. And so I've had to come up with a system to determine whether or not I find the traps. And thankfully I have Mythic to help. What I've done is I've come up with ways that the characters would be searching for traps, based on a combination of past experience and what they are most likely to find in an area. Depending on the number of different possible triggers they're looking for, I increase or decrease the likelihood that that will be the trigger that the trap actually uses. So, at the beginning of a dungeon, if I'm just looking for spring-loaded panels in the seams of doors and tripwires, my chance of finding a trap is unlikely. If after I have run into a couple of dungeons where the trap is something like a nozzle hidden under a door, then as I say that I will search for that, I will increase the likelihood in Mythic that that's going to happen to 50-50 or even somewhat likely. And the question I use is, if there is a trap here, do they find it? Only then do I double check the door to see if it is trapped. If I'm doing something more spontaneous, like using 4 against darkness, I only get to discover whether the door is trapped or not when I try to open it. This is the price we pay for trying to play very traditional D&D in a solo frame and then turn it into a podcast. I certainly understand why and don't blame others for deciding that they're just not going to include that kind of trap in the game. I suspect in the future I will use less trap-laden dungeons, if nothing else because I'm tired of having to roll up so many characters so quickly. In this case, Donjon said that the door was trapped with a poison gas trap. And despite my mounting chance of success, and my rising chaos factor, this one turned into a no. They didn't find the trap. And after some dice rolling, I discovered that the whole party would be lying asleep in the middle of the dungeon for 1 hour. With me rolling every second turn for random encounters, this gave a pretty good chance that something was going to creep up on the player characters. I can't say as though I've ever had a more tense set of D6 rolls in my entire role-playing career. Miria was the first to wake up. Stiff, sore, her head pounding, she sat up, braced herself against the wall, and pulled herself to shaky feet. The smell of ether was still heavy in the air, and she had to spend the first moment or two of consciousness throwing up from the poisoning. After that, she woke Edryk carefully, then looked around for Nala, and didn't find her. Although there were scuff marks all over the floor, a trail of coins from what appeared to be a broken coin pouch, and a few spots of blood.
Edryk, I need you to pull yourself together quickly. Something's taken Nala.
What? How long have we been out? Miria checked her bracer.
About an hour, which is way too long around here. Oh, I hope nothing bad has happened to her. We have to move.
They raced through the blue gloom of the dungeon, following shining black spots here and there. Twisting, turning, first through familiar rooms and then along an unfamiliar corridor, until at last they came to a small rectangular room, not far off of the three with the difficult doors. Miria's stomach lurched as she took in the tableau. Nala lay, most definitely dead, on the floor in the center of the room. She was in a pool of expanding blood. She looked for only a second, just long enough to take in the horrible details of what had happened. Then, shaking with fury, she turned her eyes on the creature responsible. Another soft-bodied hermit crab-like creature. This one larger than the last, but still stuffed, barely fitting, into one of the crystalline pyramids that lit the Fane. It was still chewing on a hunk of Nala's stolen flesh. Miria ground her jaw so hard her teeth ached and her jaw popped as she raised the laser and cut it to ribbons. Swords Against Madness was written, directed, played, and GM'd by Brian C. Rideout. Editing and production was done by Stormhead Productions, which is also Brian Rideout. I have generated the music in this series using the Suno AI. For show notes and more information, visit swordsvmadness.stormheadproductions.ca. You can reach me on X at swordsvmadness, and you can email me at swordsvmadness@stormheadproductions.ca. I have the great fortune to be able to read another review of Swords Against Madness today. This one comes from Punk RN Dad, Podcast Addict. 4 episodes deep, and so far this is totally awesome. I absolutely love the combination of fantasy and sci-fi. It's great to have the occasional glimpse behind the solo GM's screen to hear how he handles the mechanics of playing alone. Thanks so much, Punk RN Dad. I hope you're enjoying the latest twists and turns. I'm going to be dialing both the science fiction and the fantasy up to 11 in the next few episodes. Your kind words mean a lot to me. And until next time, roll high, play hard, and think weird.